expected a little more of a challenge than that, but he certainly wasn't going to turn her down. He tossed his cue onto the table, to the protest of Slider, who had been lining up his next shot. Jack ignored him, slid one hand over the brunette's hip, and pushed her toward the front door. Outside, the temperature had fallen a bit in the chilly October night air, but things were heating up between them to make up for it. Her steady gait led them away from Jack's Harley and toward the rest of the parking lot. Not wanting to wait anymore, Jack pressed her up against the nearest car and placed both hands on either side of her, gripping her hips tightly. Now that he wasn't concentrating on the game, he could get a better look at her, up close and personal. He leaned down to her but held himself off as something about her seemed so familiar. "I know you," he mused. In fact, Jack was sure of it. He just didn't know where he'd seen her before. She shook her head and slid sideways against the car, out of his hold. "No, you don't," she replied. "Yes, I do," Jack argued. He leaned back and searched her face again. The eyes he recognized looking up at him, like before. "You were in my bed," he realized. "True," she said. "I was in your bed, but you don't know me." "What the fuck?" Jack turned to see a familiar face stalking toward him from out of the shadows. Caleb Barnes, ex-cop, ex-Army Ranger, among other things, Jack suspected. Jack narrowed his eyes at the man. Beside him, the youngest of Chris Sullivan's lackeys, the one with the missing leg, stood as backup. Jack glanced toward the bar's front door, looking for Chris or the other two guys he usually hung around with. Not seeing them, he snorted and turned his gaze back to Barnes. An ex-cop and a cripple were nothing to worry about. "Fuck off," he snapped. "Get your fucking hands off her," Barnes snarled back, moving toward Jack as though he stood a chance against him. The brunette moved in between them, blocking Barnes's advance. "I need something from you, Pryor," she said smoothly. Jack smiled, but didn't take his eyes off Barnes. He had no doubt that he could kick the man's ass, but he also knew it'd be a rough ride. Plus, he'd rather ride the brunette. For sure. "After I grease Barney Fife and the Gimp, I'll give it to you, baby," he assured her. "I'll give it to you all night and all day tomorrow, if you're a good girl." She wasn't impressed. In fact, she sighed heavily. "I doubt that, Pryor. You'll probably be dead by then." Jack's gaze swung back to her. He stiffened at her suddenly prickly tone. Finally, he realized that Barnes and the woman knew each other, even though they hadn't come into the bar together. Outnumbered and confused, Jack slid one hand into his pocket and pulled out the switchblade he always kept there and snatched at the woman with his free hand. He yanked her hard, nearly pulling her off her feet, and maneuvered her in front of him, knife at her throat. He wasn't certain what the hell was going on, but he needed a safe position from which to figure it out. Barnes reached behind him and drew a .45. He leveled the gun right at Jack. Tricky shot, though. He might fuck it up and kill the woman. Jack wondered if he'd try anyway. Over the last couple of years, Chris's newly formed crew made sense to Jack. The Indian was from around here anyway, from the res a few miles down the highway. The Texan looked strong enough, a good man to have in a fight, and the Gimp, well, Chris was a good guy and every club needed a mascot. But Barnes? Jack had never figured out. Because if Caleb Barnes hadn't latched onto Chris Sullivan and the rest of his white hat group of friends, Jack could easily see this man being a prez of his own gang. This man was a killer, and how the fuck Chris couldn't see it, Jack would never understand. "Holy fuck," the kid next to Barnes grumbled. "Fucking fighting, I don't have a gun or a knife. Thanks for the heads up, Doc." "Let her go, Pryor," Barnes ordered. "What the fuck?" Jack replied curtly. "Someone start talking or she starts bleeding." He wasn't going to knife a woman in a parking lot, but leverage was leverage, and Jack wasn't above using her, and Barnes's obvious concern for her, to his advantage. "Fair enough," the woman answered. Jack was impressed that she wasn't crying or blubbering or otherwise irritating the shit out of him. He felt her reach into her jacket pocket, and he steadied the blade against her skin, knowing she felt it. There was a sharp click, though not of a gun cocking. She lifted a palm-sized digital recorder into the light, and Jack heard Soap's voice, clear as day. "Look, enough's enough. All these fucking plans, and we're still standing around with our dicks in our hands. We ain't seen a payday like he's been promising." "Soap, killing a brother ain't no walk in the park." That was Butch, always the voice of reason. "Jesus, man, killing a brother? Nah, man, killing the prez. Let's call it like it is. He deserves that much anyway."